Hello guys and girls, Gleb Alexandrov here. Allow me to present one of the tutorials from creating stylized 3D art course to you. In this one we will use an amazing software EbSynth and Blender for the animation style transfer. I hope you will like it. Throughout the course we have been talking about style in the context of static renders, but obviously all of us would love to apply those concepts to the entire animated image sequences like you see on the screen right now. So in this tutorial we will have a look at EbSynth. That's a cool free software that takes an image sequence and a keyframe or a bunch of keyframes with a certain style as input, and it transfers the style from the keyframe to the image sequence to produce a non-photoreal, stylized, cool animation. It's not super universal, but in some cases it works wonders. So let's jump straight in. First of all, before we use EbSynth for style transfer, we need to prepare the scene. So here we have a certain scene provided by Manu, which looks amazing on its own, very non-photoreal, very stylized, based on the proportions of the things, based on the general simplicity level, which is closer to what we may call the cartoonish look, and it's being rendered in Eevee, so it's super blazing fast, obviously. Okay, so I will switch back to the 0 frame of the animation, to the beginning of the animation, and then I will create the second window for the shader editor, because I would like to change a few things within the shaders to provide EbSynth with the footage that makes it a lot easier to transfer the style. Basically, I'm gonna add the checker texture, but first I will replace the original shaders with a simple diffuse shader, as we won't need any kind of reflections. It's even highly undesirable, I would say, for the style transfer, because reflections are constantly changing shape. That isn't necessarily something that we need in this case, because we will be redrawing the style of the keyframe that will propagate to the entire animation. So we would better use the simple shaders without reflections. And the next thing that I will do is press Shift-A, add texture, and select checker texture. The colors of the checkers can be practically anything. I will retain the original blue one in the second color slot just for the sake of artistic cohesiveness. But other than that, it can be anything. Just make sure it has enough contrast. I will adjust the scale to make sure that we have lots and lots of those checkers. We can imagine that each checker is its own little marker that will ease the process of tracking the geometry for EbSynth, something along these lines. Right, we can also separate the colors of the checkers by hue, so I made this separation of bluish and greenish tones. I will repeat the same procedure for the backdrop. So I'm selecting the orange backdrop geometry, going into the shader editor, adding the diffuse shader and replacing the original one with it. Then Shift-A, texture, checker texture, plug the color into the color input of the diffuse shader. Select a set of the colors that don't repeat the colors that we have already created, because the key thing here to keep in mind is separation of colors and enough contrast. Okay, after adjusting the scale, we can see that the checker texture became a little bit scaled horizontally, stretched a little bit. We can counter that by selecting checker texture, pressing Ctrl-T to create texture coordinate and the mapping node, and changing the mapping to object. And now our checkers should be distributed in a more uniform way. Actually, I love how it looks, even without jumping into EbSynth, you know. It already looks pretty neat and super expressive, if you ask me. Maybe we should consider sticking with it to the end. Alright, I'm gonna add the checker texture to the guy's head as well, the bluish and purplish combination that doesn't repeat the colors in the backdrop and in the back of the car. And I did the same trick for the bumper, and I think we're good to go. Let's preview the animation within the viewport by pressing Shift Space. I think we can render it out. It should be a great source material for style transfer. And something I need to mention is that while this preparation process that involves checker, texture, and all that stuff isn't 100% necessary, you can just use the original animation and EbSynth will still generate a cool style transfer. It's still helpful to go through this preparation process because it just makes the result better, trust me. And now we obviously need to render our super duper expressive animation out. So I will go to the output settings, set the resolution to 100% of 1080p, then check the frame start and end. Here it's set to 0 and 200. What else do we need to check? Maybe frame rate, 30 frames per second, sounds good. File format should be PNG or something uncompressed to not have to deal with the compression artifacts. Okay, and here goes an important tip. Here I created 3 folders, one for the source animation, the other one for the keyframe that we'll be painting over, and the output folder that we will dump the resulting animation to. So here I'm using the source folder for the raw animation from Blender. And here I'm going render animation and keeping fingers crossed that it won't take long. And hopefully it won't because we're using Eevee. Eevee is fast. And indeed it didn't take long, just a few seconds per frame, a few minutes for the entire animation. And what a funky looking piece of garbage it is. I love it. Now, when we have the source animation rendered out, we can move on to painting the keyframe. So here we go. It is Krita, free painting application that you can download at krita.org. For painting the keyframe, what I did first is I rendered out just one frame of the animation, the first one, using cycles. Wait, cycles? Yeah, I used cycles to get a free bounced lights and all the fancy properties of path traced renders. But then we desaturated it in Krita to prepare a clean plate for painting, and I asked Lena to give it a try at painting over this thing. The rules for stylizing this image that we discussed with Lena, they were very simple indeed. Lena could do anything with it without changing the silhouette of the model too much, that is, without changing the initial shape of the objects. But aside from that, from the color perspective, it could be anything, any color scheme, any crazy style of brush strokes, lines, and just general visual flow. What about the backdrop? The backdrop could be practically virtually anything, because on the original render it's just a flat plane, so we could fantasize with something crazy. Also, something that needs to be mentioned is that you need to memorize what kind of keyframe you have selected for painting over. Here we have chosen the keyframe number 1 for the simplicity's sake, I guess. But actually it wasn't the ideal choice because on the first keyframe you can't see the ground behind the car. That's something that we realized a little bit too late. But anyway, that's the frame number 1 used for the overpainting process. Let me now rewind a little bit. So the painting process is actually super fun. I encourage you to try it out. You can do whatever you want. You can paint seashells instead of stones. You can go crazy with adding stuff that wasn't there in the first place, like dead fish, for example. The magic of the entire process of stylizing the animation, as I see it, is that we can set the keyframe very far apart from how the original render looked. If you haven't done that before, it's a whole lot of fun, and it's an incredible opportunity to realize the artistic potential of the render by just letting yourself free. Imagine that you can do whatever you want with the keyframe. Well, without going too far with changing the silhouette, I say. But you can do a lot. In the next one, we will take this image sequence and the stylized keyframe, and we will generate the amazing stylized animation in EbSynth. Welcome back to the animation style transfer tutorial, the second part of it, in which we will proceed with creating the stylized animated sequence in EbSynth. So what we will do in this tutorial is that we will take the fancy looking checker textured animation that we have rendered in the previous tutorial and the keyframe that Lina has painted, and we combine them to produce the stylized looking result with the help of EbSynth free software. Alright, so here is our 200 frames, or rather 201, that we have rendered out in the previous video. And what I will do first is that I will delete the frame that is called 0000. Of course, we can rename the files to start with the frame 001 or something like that, with help of, for example, XNView software or something like that. But I will just delete the frame 0. Because for some mysterious reason, EbSynth seems to have problems with frames that are named 0000. Alright, so here we have 3 folders. The source one is self-explanatory, it's the source animation. The key folder is the folder with the keyframe. Let's use this opportunity to rename it to 0001 because that's the number of the frame that we used for overpainting. That's important. It should correspond with the naming conventions of the video frames, of the source animation frames. By the way, the resolution of the keyframe should also correspond to the resolution of the source frames. All of these things are important. Now on to the EbSynth part. First of all, we need to select the video frames. That's the folder that is called source. The naming convention really helps to keep track of what are we doing. So here we have this source animation put into the software. Now we just need to point it out to the keyframes. That is the folder that is called key. See, very easy. By the way, I think Lina did a great job of painting this frame. It looks like it didn't come from Blender at all. It looks completely, artistically stylized. And in my opinion, that's the whole point of using the style transfer software like EbSynth. It's that kind of special magic that happens on blending the 3D rendered frames with a 2D painted keyframe, for that matter. So here we have chosen the keyframe, and we just need to select the output folder, and we should be good to go. The output is called out, and now I'm just setting the start frame, the keyframe, and the end frame of the animation, with the start and end being 1 and 200. I hope it makes sense. But basically you start with frame 1 and you use the keyframe that corresponds with the first frame to produce 200 frames of animation. And then we can just go straight on to the synth button, but first I will set the weights of the video to 8, otherwise it will look slightly smudged. That's not something that I'm entirely excited about. And I'm also gonna reduce the deflicker value to something like 0.6 from the initial one, because I don't mind a little bit of flickering. On the upside, it will help us to reduce, some kind of waviness and liquid looking effect, again, smudginess, at least in this particular case. Alright, so we got no errors whatsoever, because we did everything right. The keyframe number was correct, the resolution of the keyframe and the source frame corresponded. So yeah, here we have the final result, the stylized animation. It's a complete magic. Well, I see a few bugs here and there, especially if you look just below the car when it jumps, and the sea is a little bit squishy if you have a look in the window. But we're gonna fix some of those bugs in just a moment. I think that it looks awesome already. Anyway, some of these bugs can be thought as features. Now onto the free version of Davinci Resolve to assemble a video out of the frames produced by EbSynth. First of all, I'm gonna right-click in this field and import media. Let's find the folder that we have called out. That's the output of EbSynth. Control A to select every frame and click open. Now we should see our image sequence in this panel. We just need to create the timeline to drag this image sequence onto. So create new timeline, use custom settings. Let's see what we have in the format tab. 1080p in terms of resolution and 30 frames per second in terms of timeline frame rate. It can be anything, of course, but I have planned to use 30 frames per second, so why not? At least for the demo. Alright, and now we can just drag and drop the image sequence onto the timeline. It's always a very exciting moment, at least for me, to see it the first time in action. I think, as I've said, it looks already pretty damn awesome. It's a pure magic for the eyes, despite the few bugs here and there. The thing that I think needs fixing is the space below the car, where we didn't have the information in the keyframe, because yeah, that was my fault. We have chosen the keyframe number 1, the first frame of the animation, and the first frame didn't have anything, like any information about the space below the car. So let's paint one more keyframe to fix it. But what frame should we choose for our keyframe fixing work? I think something near the frame 9, where we see a little bit of ground will work well. So let's insert it into Krita as a new layer, or as a new composition for that matter. And I will use the clone brush to fix some of the bugged parts of the image. I mostly refer to the area below the car, obviously, where we have the things messed up. We can use Control to sample some area of the image, which will be used for cloning and stamping. And what I'm doing here is I'm doctoring the image until it looks like the car casts shadow. We can render the reference frame from Blender to see how it would look if it was physically plausible, but I think it will look close enough, even if we don't waste too much time on fixing it. It doesn't have to be perfect, and we won't be using anything outside that small region of the shadow casted by the car, so I don't pay much attention to everything else outside this region. Alright, we can save this fixed frame as PNG and call it according to its number. It was the 8th frame, so I call it 0008, so it corresponds with the image sequence numbering convention. It's extremely important to keep these details in mind, because EbSynth really pays attention to them. And now we just need to change the number of the keyframe within EbSynth. Just change it from 1 to 8. It will tell EbSynth to use the 8th keyframe instead. That is obviously the precise number of the frame that we have just fixed in Krita. I will create a new folder called out_02, and I will put the final result in this folder. And after clicking the Synth button and waiting a couple of minutes, we should have the second version of the animation with the new keyframe used for stylizing. And after importing it into Davinci Resolve, I will put it above the original footage. As you can see, our efforts in fixing bugs really paid dividends, so the area below the car is fixed. At least it seems to be fixed. I can see a bunch of new bugs which we don't have to care about. For example, have a look at the sea in the original image, especially the part of it that is seen through the window, as if in the newer one it looks really horrible. It jumps with the car, so we need to somehow mask the regions that we would like to use from that secondary version of the animation, and we can do it by utilizing the masks in the color tab of Resolve. I will use the circular mask, and I will stretch it out so it encompasses the region with the casted shadow. And to preview the effect of the mask, you can press this magic wand icon or something like that, and Davinci users will probably punch me in the face for calling this a magic wand. But anyway, this button allows to isolate the result of the node that we are working on, the one we have just masked. Okay, now we need to add the alpha output. So right mouse click, add alpha output. It is marked in blue, and we need to drag this blue rectangle to this output. That will tell Resolve to use the alpha of this layer in the final composition. So now we can see only the masked area being affected. Everything else became totally transparent, and that's precisely what we wanted to do, so congrats, my friend. If you wish to do the last minute tweaks, we can play with the feathering parameter of the mask with its softness. But I think that the default value was pretty much on point. I think it works really well. So that's a quick workaround to get rid of the bug below the car, and now we can move on to exporting the footage. So when we are satisfied with the result, let's go over to the Deliver tab in the bottom of the user interface, and there we need to select the format, the codec, and other properties of the video file. So for the format, I will go with MP4, so I can successfully share it on Twitter and other social media. The resolution is still 1080p, frame rate set to 30. What else? We can name the file, of course, and I will just call it unimaginatively EbSynth stylized 01 or something like that. Click save, and finally we need to press the Add to Render Queue button, and it will add this file to the right tab where we see the queue. And now in this deeply satisfying act, we can hit the render button. And if everything goes well, we will be presented with this final version of our EbSynth animation, the style transfer test that we did together. Congratulations, my friend. Feel free to download the project files as usual and play with your own interpretation of the keyframe. I can't wait to see your results, your artistic vision, your non-photorealistic interpretation of this video. Make sure to check the full course, Create Stylized 3D Art in Blender on creativeshrimp.com, and make sure to share and subscribe to our Creative Shrimp channel if you haven't done that already. Just hit the subscribe button. My name is Gleb Alexandrov. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.